Welcome back to the 2-Minute Warning, episode 431, back on the topic of the NFL today. Jay and I are going to be talking about why we think the Los Angeles Chargers can have a top 5 defense in the 2021 season. Again, really, the Chargers didn't have a bad defense last year, and we do believe they can make that step up. But before we get into that video, the question of the day is, who was the head coach that led the Los Angeles Chargers to their last Super Bowl appearance in the 94-95 season? Again, if you know the answer, comment below, and if you don't, stick around to the end of the video, and we'll discuss it then. But like I said, Jay, Chargers, a middle-of-the-pack defense last year. What can they do to make a step up to a top-5 defense this year?
Yeah, a big reason why I think this Chargers team can make a step up in becoming a top-5 defense is because last year, if they had a healthy roster, they're automatically already a top-10 defense. So with a solid offseason, with a brand-new head coach, I think the top-5 jump is not unrealistic at all. Of course, there's other defenses in the NFL that are hard to deal with. The Steelers, the Colts, the Dolphins are emerging. You always got the Rams, a healthy Niners, so they're probably going to have to bump out one of those guys, but it's definitely possible. Looking at the Chargers defense right now, you have Joey Bosa, arguably one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. He's the highest paid defensive end in the NFL, and you have a good secondary with Casey Hayward, who has plenty of experience, Chris Harris Jr., plenty of experience, won the Super Bowl with the Broncos, so he's got playoff and Super Bowl experience as well, and of course a very young and very all-pro but injury-prone Derwin James. Great safety for the Chargers. However, like I said, the injuries are a problem. A lot of those guys are banged up last year. Chris Harris Jr. and Casey Hayward are up there in age at 31, but they're still very viable cornerbacks. They are losing in free agency Melvin Ingram, Michael Davis, and Denzel Perryman. However, a lot of those guys, Michael Davis, solid guy. I think the Chargers should look at keeping him. Melvin Ingram, though, I think he's been very injury-prone. I think he will cost too much, and he, as well, is up there in age. I'm okay with letting him go. You also have Justin Jones on the defensive line, who's kind of emerging. He's still pretty young. Not the most talented guy at pass rush, but he is a run stopper, and that's definitely a factor, part of your defense, stopping the run game. So, like I said, they're not perfect, but with that amount of talent, that amount of experience, and that amount of potential, I do think a healthy roster with Brandon Staley, a very defensive-minded coach, is a top 10 roster automatically. And I think they'll make the top 5 jump because of Brandon Staley primarily. He led the Rams to the number 1 defense statistically last year. Yes, they had Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey, of course, but Chargers have their own thing going with Derwin James and Joey Bosa. Not the exact same comparison, but enough to make the comparison. I think with Brandon Staley being this head coach, he's going to look at those LA guys that he had, such as John Johnson, a safety from the LA Rams, such as Troy Hill, a corner from the LA Rams, and such as Leonard Floyd, a pass rusher from the LA Rams, and possibly be able to recruit one of those guys to the other side of LA to the Chargers. Like I said, though, with the amount of talent they have, the Chargers don't need a best corner in the league, the best pass rusher in the league. They don't need a top guy. So I think getting Troy Hill and John Johnson, like I just said, won't shut down the number 1 receiver from any team by any means. They're kind of, I don't want to say role players, but definitely not the top corner or safety in the league. However, under Brandon Staley, they're very efficient, very viable, and have produce great production for their team and defense. So I just think add an extra piece to a secondary that already has a lot of talent. And Hayward, Harris Jr., and Derwin James, an extra safety in Johnson, or an extra corner in Troy Hill is exactly what this team needs. And that's not even looking at the rest of free agency outside of the LA Rams. And, of course, Leonard Floyd would help out Joey Bosa, and that would be one of the most dangerous pass rushers in the NFL overall. And then you still have the draft. And if somehow, some way, a Caleb Farley or Patrick Surtain falls to you at number 13 overall in the draft, I say jump on it. Offensive line, you definitely need to address it, but there's 6 other rounds, and you have free agency to address it as well. I think at 13, you take an offensive line, but if Farley or Surtain available, you jump on that type of talent. There's only 2 top corners in the NFL draft, and then it drops. If you get one of those 2 guys, this is a top 5 defense.
Yeah, obviously, he touched on it. The biggest reason is you're getting the new head coach with Brandon Staley, who, when the Chargers hired him, it was because he could prove that he could bring an offensive mind to the table, because he's already got the defensive part of the game down pat with what he did in LA. So you're getting a head coach that is already defensive minded. So that's the biggest reason why I think this Rams can make the step up. And then, of course, you got a foundation with Derwin James and Joey Bosa. And then, like Jay said, if you get a chance in the draft that a Michael Parsons comes or slides back in the draft, you get a linebacker with him, or Patrick Surtain, or Caleb Farley, the potential for an elite defender is absolutely there, especially with the Chargers, who have what pick do they have? Do you know? 13th pick in the NFL draft. So you're going to have a top half pick. So to say those guys will slip is maybe not super likely, but certainly possible. And you have endless free agency options. with, I mean, you named a lot of them, Shaq Barrett from the Bucks and
Yeah.
Carlos Dunlap with the Seahawks just released. So there's all these options in free agency. And then, like, the Chargers aren't starting from rock bottom. If I'm not mistaken, they were 10th, maybe they were 11th, I think, in total yards given up last year on average per game. So they're not starting from absolutely nothing. And then, of course, like I said, bringing in Brandon Staley should be able to do a lot with what they're providing him on the defensive side of the football. Like I said, with Joey Bosa, one of the best ends in football, Derwin James at safety, and like I said, you get a Caleb Farley, a Petra Surtain possibly, then this is going to be an elite defense.
Yeah, even if the recruiting doesn't go through the draft or through Brandon Staley's connection with the Rams, there's other guys out there such as Ronald Darby from Washington. He has experience, another Troy Hill type of player where he's not going to be your number one corner and take out the number one guy, but he's good enough to add depth to your roster. Xavier Rose, one of the top guys, another FSU secondary guy we know FSU produces great guys such as Jalen Ramsey, such as Derwin James, Deion Sanders. Xavier Rhodes is one of those guys, and he would help out the Chargers. I think he'll go back to the Colts, but if you offer the right price, I'm sure he'd consider it. And then, of course, like Carson said, you could go for a big-ticket pass rusher such as Shaq Barrett that will completely change this Chargers offense completely. Yeah. So that is definitely a consideration, but another huge factor that will help out this defense is the side of the offense, because if Justin Herbert is the top quarterback, one of the top quarterbacks in the league, that means he'll be controlling a lot of time of possession. And when the defense have the ball or are facing the ball less, I guess is the right way to say it, they will give up less yards because there's not as much time, which will help them out statistically and show them as one of the top defenses. So to me, on paper, with this defensive-minded coach and Brandon Staley, you are a top 10 defense, either in the draft or in free agency. If you can add extra corner and an extra edge rusher, all it takes is 2 extra guys on this defense that are no names, that don't even have to be X-Factor star names, just a role player that can bring value. This is a top 5 defense. A lot of it will come down to Brandon Staley doing his side, and I truly think Justin Herbert's going to have a lot of time in possession, making the Chargers not be so tired out, having to be on defense less, and they're only going to give up so many yards a game, which will help them all around.
Yeah, and we're talking about whether they could be top 5. Realistically, even if, like you said, we got the Niners, you got the Colts, you got the Steelers, you got the Rams, there's so many good defenses that even with the step up, we might not see the Chargers actually be a top 5, but for them to be even in the conversation, paired with the offense that we expect, that if they can, I'm assuming they kind of really need to get offensive line help. You got one of the best quarterbacks, best young quarterbacks in the league. So really, even if this doesn't quite work out and the Chargers end up with the 8th best defense in the league, you're still going to see a team that can win 10 games. So I think that just for this to be a conversation means the Chargers are going to be in good shape for this year, but it is realistic they squeeze into the top 5.
Yeah, I think you perfectly said it. At the very worst, a non-injury team, I think, will get top 10, and I think they're going to address all the issues they have. Offensive line obviously is a top priority because they know the defense already has talent, but if they just show it even a little bit of attention, it will go from top 10 to top 8, like Carson said, and if they give it a lot of attention, top 5 is definitely within the realm of possibilities.
And for all we know, even without any additions, Brandon Staley could come in and take what they have and make it jump from a top 12 to a top 8 defense. So I think Brandon Staley is the key.
Yeah, to be honest, I would almost address offensive line and free agency and leave the entire draft for defense. However, I think they'll go vice versa. I think they'll look at a couple key players in defense in free agency and then focus the entire draft on offensive line. Not a bad idea. Either way works. Just make sure it is addressed either side of the ball. Defense, if you want it to be top 5, but you want to make sure your team all around is good as well.
Absolutely, guys. Those are our takes about the Chargers defense. Comment below what yours is, whether or not they can be a top 5, because we believe that it is on the table. That's all for the video. And for your question of the day, your Chargers head coach for the 94-95 Super Bowl that they went to was Bobby Ross. Guys, thanks for watching. 2-Minute Warning.